Hello, everybody. We're Strippedown, and we're doing podcast number 2. And the themes for this week will be individuality, creative thought, and creative freedom as well and expression. I'm Anthony, guitar, piano, writer, little this or that. I'm here with my man in crime, Mr. Professor Fred Dinkins, drums, percussion, mentor. And behind me is music aficionado Spencer Simpkins, and of course, the man behind all the technology and engineering and the kid in the candy shop himself, Mr. Lenny Leonardo Jones. Yay! So this week, we're going to go through some Q&As with Spencer, and I think the theme is we're going to talk about the nexus, the genesis of where people can get in a mindset when they're by themselves and they can be creative and be relaxed and really come to understand themselves. So with that, I think Spencer had some questions that we're going to start with and we're going to go through.
I sure do. Let's start with the idea of creating just for yourself. Those quiet moments at the piano or guitar when no one's watching. What does that space mean to you as an artist?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Well, I think my viewpoint is there's nothing more important than spending time and understanding yourself and trying to actually pull yourself away from all the people and all the things that you have going on in your life. I think people have individual either means or mechanisms that work for them to kind of reach that point. For me, personally, I love nothing more than just sitting behind a piano or a guitar, sometimes with a book, and really getting into like the stream of unconsciousness. And I think that really through those moments, there's nothing influencing me. There's nobody. I'm just in my own zone. And I think there's nothing better and more comforting than being able to just be and really discover yourself and discover which directions your mind can go into. What about you, Fred?
For me, that moment in time of creativity comes in a number of ways. I may be at the piano or behind the drums, but it starts with me by practicing most of the time first, and then that spurs the creativity. It spikes it because now I'm starting to hear different things from, let's say if I play paradiddles, well, that may spark a certain way that I approach the paradiddles, and it just keeps going on from there. But it's really important to have that special time, as you said, by yourself, to get to know what's inside. It's very important.
Now, why do you think it's important for artists, especially younger ones, to spend time in their own thoughts outside of formulas or trends?
Well, number one, the youth today, they don't have to do what we did growing up, like listening to a record player over and over and over, cassette tapes, rewinding and back and forth. And it takes a serious mind to be able to dream about being a certain person, like creativity, having that creativity to force yourself to work. That's the biggest thing. It's like the younger crowd, I've spoken to several people, they don't understand what that work ethic is. And that work ethic starts with you being by yourself. So if the younger generation can take that attitude of like being positive, have the self-confidence of knowing who they are by way of being creative, it's we'll be in a much better place music-wise. The musicality will go up.
Well, I think that especially for you, Fred, who is a mentor and has a lot of experience, teaching, training younger generations and younger children from us, will have a different angle, I think, than myself. And my viewpoint is that when I look at my kids and I look at their friends and I look at some of the younger generations, it reminds me that, when I was, in my 20s, that's when the internet really became the norm for most people. Cell phones were discovered right after, were like really mainstream, and everybody had them right after. The smartphone didn't come out till 10 years later until I was much older. The younger generations were just born with that. And I think that with that, I think their conditioning and their mindset is just in a different place. And I think sometimes we kind of minimize that impact because it's so hard not growing up in that era to really understand the exact same way that they would perceive the world and their approach to things. I think our job is trying to be mentors, is trying to remind them that really, if you want to achieve things, it's great to dream. I think our world is always a balance between being individual versus, being idealistic versus being realistic. And I think if you want to, it's great to be a dreamer. But at the same time, I think it's very important that you have to take the effort and have the self-discipline and have the preparation that's still like a timelessness that's the approach still has to be that way. And I think that for younger people that want to take shortcuts and try to use technology as shortcuts, I think they're kind of cheating themselves in a way. And I still think that in the end of the day, they're not going to reach the potential that a lot of people really can reach on many levels for many different means.
No, Fred, like what you mentioned when you really unlock your creativity by practicing your paradiddles, something over and over again, you can unlock this creative side that you might be entering a flow state, so to speak, just playing without thinking. How do you see that impacting your most honest or inspired work?
Oh, that's everything. I mean, that's when the practice allows the creativity to flow. I mean, we all think of ideas and things that we could do, but without the practice, that avenue is never open up. That door is never open, because once you perform, you have two things. You have a creative side, then you have a learning side. One side of the brain is always wanting to create, and the other side of the brain is always wanting to learn. When you perform, you want that creative side to just take over, to where everything becomes completely second nature. You're not even thinking, it just happens, because you really don't want to be in that working mode while you're performing. But when you're practicing, like I said, you open up that door to allow all the creative ideas and juices to flow, and then you try to master those, once you get there. But without the practice, the creativity is not going to happen, not the way you want it to when you perform. So once you get there in that creative mode, it just happens. Like, even sometime when I come in, Anthony's playing the piano, and I just start playing, we all of a sudden at a different vibe, man. We done got into a zone without even thinking about it. And we're not working on nothing specific, but it's like, wow, we just created a song without realizing it. And Leonard will go, hey, we have to put that down. We got to put that down now. And now we have to stop and literally think about what we just played, because we were in that creative state.
Now, Anthony, I've known you a long time, and there's one thing I could say for certain is you have a curious mind. You've mentioned before how creative breakthroughs often come from people who aren't confined by systems, people who combine disciplines, experiment, or just think differently. Can you expand on that?
Well, I think, as you know, that I'm an avid reader. I like to read pretty much a lot in what spare times I have, I guess. I love biographies, specifically, and I love reading, about history and other things. But one of my favorite authors is Walter Isaacson, and I think his books can get really complex, And he wrote about Einstein, Da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Franklin. I've read a lot of his books. And I think one theme that he always has is people that are polymaths, like Benjamin Franklin, that just have numerous different skill sets and disciplines. But then also, going to your question, having someone like Einstein. Einstein, when he was working at a Swiss patent in 1905, had his greatest year of discovering everything. It was not part of this like Germanic, Prussian educational system where he probably wouldn't be allowed, the system wouldn't allow him to make those breakthroughs because you're not thinking differently. Your mindset is much more constricted and confined than having this openness that you can have when you're not just being kind of dictated in numerous ways to what to do. And I think the same thing with Da Vinci. Da Vinci really wasn't recognized for his genius really until either the end of his life or even after that from other people, and his legend was passed on. In fact, if you read the book, the first lines of the book was, and he's a painter too. And it's funny because most people would identify him as being a painter. Yet, some of his most creative brilliance came from so many different areas, whether it was engineering or he came up with ideas of flying, just observing birds, just being so observant and just having such a curious mind, not worrying about, the way he's going to be perceived from people. He turned down some of the best commissions that, to do portraits from some of the wealthiest people in Italy because he didn't want to do it. And he didn't, and to me, that's creative integrity. And I think that's so inspiring, especially reading these books, knowing that it's so great. There's nothing more than I like than sitting around, like I was saying earlier, especially on days where we all meet up to do recordings and write and kind of throw around ideas, where sometimes I'm just playing, and then slowly Lenny, Fred will come over, and all of a sudden something will catch Fred's ear, and he'll just sit down and start playing. There's nothing that dictates. I don't care. It doesn't matter what the world thinks. We're feeling it. And it's cool that the people in that room at that moment understand and have this great understanding that like what we're doing at that moment is great. And also getting back to Fred's thoughts earlier, that preparation, my hope is that younger generations would really take the time to think of music in the traditional sense, meaning they really have the curiosity of how songs are created, especially the classics. Go back and look at the great, composers and writers in time, not just contemporaries that are now. You want to understand why symphonies, how they're written, where the inspiration was. Looking at some of the great jazz writers of all time. To me, if somebody can try, they should always put a level that's, you shoot high. You want to be like Billy Strayhorn. You want to be like Duke Ellington. You want to be like Gershwin. You shoot for the heavyweights. But then look at their songs. They're so well constructed. They're so inspiring. And I think that the only way you can achieve that is you really have to have a true love for theory and really try to have a full understanding of all the great disciplines of music, harmony, melody, rhythm. And when you're in that moment, you're prepared. And many times I hear people say, I always can write these great things, and I hear these great ideas in my head. When I try to put them down on the means, whether it's a piano or a guitar, I can never do that. So my thought with them is, how much time did you spend on ear training? How much time did you spend studying theory? You really have to have that love for that. We talked about like somebody coming over and saying, I wish I could shoot. I think I could shoot as good as Steph Curry if I would shoot, 3,000 shots a day. He loved every single moment of it, and it shows. That's how you become the greatest shooter. You're prepared for that moment, and when it comes up, you take advantage of it. And the only way you can do it is in music, in my view, when Fred comes in, people that are not around guys like Fred, there's pressure. You got to step up to that moment. He's expecting you to be at your top. He's not going to come over and would never want to play with someone like me if I'm not performing at a higher level than I can achieve. And the only way to do that is to be prepared on so many levels. So when he comes in and I'm playing and he starts playing, I'm not just sitting there playing repetitive garbage. I'm actually taking the song somewhere, and he's also leading me, and we're kind of pushing and pulling constantly to create something that's just much better than, we kind of like push each other to achieve a higher level. And at the same time, it's great when we have other people that are with us, like Lenny's in there. He has a great external ear. Sometimes it's good to have that because you need that. And I think the only way you can do that is really by really having a true love and curiosity that comes with, whatever you love to do.
Let's move into artistic identity. Now let's talk about naming songs. So why do you feel that choosing a truly original title matters? Not just for marketing, but for creative integrity.
This is the second segment of our video. I think song titles, movie titles, TV show titles, they set the stage for everything. My viewpoint is what I'm hoping is, you want to see people come up with titles that people listening to them like, where did you come with that idea? It's not like a title where you type in song title crazy and then 70,000 titles come up online. I mean, where's the integrity on that? I mean, I think the idea of being an artist is being in
Michael.
right? So what's going to happen to anybody that's ever going to write a title with that song after that? They hit the mantle.
Yeah.
So where it gets blurred is you have more simple titles that have, can be used more. So for example, the multi-gen title, Hello. Who do you think of?
Lionel Richie.
But my kids are going to be thinking of Adele. But now the question I always have is, Lionel Richie's the first. He's like Coca-Cola versus Pepsi in some ways. Pepsi's good, but Coke is the original. Even if you don't like cola, like I'm not a big cola drinker as I'm getting older, but what I will say is if you look way in the future, I still think the way that the original Lionel Richie song, Hello, I think will outlast anything that preceded it because it hit the mantle. When you think of Hello, there's mugs that sell Hello on one side, and you turn around and you have Lionel Richie's face. Is it me that you're looking for? It's because he created such genius that I think that should always be, from an artistic integrity standpoint, that should be where you're shooting for. You shoot for anything less than that, in my hope, and I try to hope for like the younger generation to be like that, you're never going to achieve that. Then you're lowering your standards, and you're just going to accept the next step, which is basically like having songs that just use every single title that you can type in online and find 50,000 copyrights of that same song title each year. What's good about that? Don't you want to be different? Don't you want to stand out? Don't you want to stand out for yourself? Or are you just trying to impress other people? Or are you trying to look for the easy way out by just not really using, your real true potential? I think it's disappointing in my view.
So when you're shooting for a title that feels timeless or iconic, is it about being the first or the boldest?
I think it's a mix of both. I think it's important. That's why it's important to have that time to yourself, to have reflection time. I think everybody needs a period of time each day that they're lost in their own thoughts that they can reflect. You don't have to be an artist, but it can relate to so many different aspects of your life. But I think when you're coming up with titles, it can't be contrived. But what inspires me personally when I do it, and it's my medium, is after reading, sometimes I'd walk around, drive around, and I'll be completely lost in thought, just thinking about different things. And all of a sudden, I start just writing out various things. I'm like, that would be a cool title. That would be an interesting title. And I think that, sometimes I'll come up with things that are so silly and so out there. And then sometimes you have to think to yourself, some of the great songs of all time have some of the some of the most odd titles that we take for granted now, even band names. Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. One of the great Morrissey/Smith songs, Suede Head. I doubt they're going to be copied again from somebody else just so they can try to make a commercial pop song. But at the same time, you're wondering yourself, God, like When Doves Cry, where was Prince when he was thinking of that and drew the inspiration for a title like that? I mean, it's such a beautiful title on one side, and it's so out there and different on the other side. Darling Nikki. I mean, I just think that should be inspiring to the people that precede him to try to come up with just ideas that are not the norm. And I think artists usually, really, in the classical sense, are people that really should be thinking out of the box. I consider those people as true artists, personally.
Now, Anthony, as you mentioned earlier, when people hear a title like Purple Rain or Billie Jean, they immediately connect it to an artist. Do you think we still strive for that level of connection today?
Well, it's going to happen no matter what's being marketed to people, regardless. So, it's a tricky question, because I think on one side, there's going to be a lot of contemporary songs. Look, there's a lot of great songs that are out there. I think that, the one thing that's going to be important, in my view, is, are you going to find songs with such original titles that it's going to capture your attention from the titles, and the songs that are not going to be thought of before? You have a lot of pop songs these days, especially pop, that are just basically taking titles from past years that worked and just kind of repackaging it with like a different kind of song. But I think that, we're better than that, really. I think that it's the allure of somebody coming up with a title that captures you. I have to listen to what that song is. Wow, or that title is so out there. I want to hear what this person has to say. I think is really, it creates that intrigue, I think, that's just being different. And I think it's very important. Look, I'm not saying people can go and look at some really great underground music, or you can go online, and there's some really fantastic artists that are out there that do fantastic work. But I think my hope is that, a larger segment of our society would want to see something like that. And I think you have to have that need. If it's not there, then you're just going to get the same regurgitated stuff on the pop market. I just think that back in the 70s and 80s, I just think that the interesting titles were not even just underground. They were mainstream. And why did they work? It's because they had great music and relatable music and really, really charismatic artists. They had the whole package back then. And I think that's important to have that today, and not be less than like what it was back then. What's your take, Fred?
I think it's so important to have a great title, because it's a connectivity to the soul, to the environment of the mind when the song or lyrics were created. It helps the listener to tap in and be a part of the song. So that's what you want. You want your audience to become a part of that song, whether it be like a melody. When the first note is played, they know that song is coming because they have an attachment to that song. There's something about the title. There's something about the lyrics that go along with the title that tells a story. It's like a movie. Denise Williams has a song called Silly. She calls herself silly because she fell in love with the wrong person. And so many women, not just women, but men, as soon as that song, the first note of that melody is played, the crowd erupts. I saw a lady Saturday night when Denise started singing, literally turn around and ran and just burst into tears. All from a title. And it's like, that's the importance of having that thought process when you write a song, to say, what's this title going to be? Like anything that comes from a creative standpoint. It could be a book, it could be a picture, it could be anything. It's got to have that title to have the connectivity from whatever you're listening to or looking at, for that person that's looking or listening to dive into that.
I think you're right. I think the title draws the listener in. and keeps them there. If the title draws them in, a good melodic line, good music keeps them and keeps their attention drawn to that. And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, it's a story. It's a story.
Well, I agree completely. And I think we'll move into our next talking point, which is nature, motion, and laziness. So, Anthony, you once reflected on what you observed while on safari in Africa, specifically how animals move with purpose. What stood out to you during your experience?
Okay, well, let's start by saying that obviously these are like great conversations that we'll sometimes have. One of the things I definitely spend a lot of time doing, and I encourage people, is to travel around the world at any opportunity you can and experience and have a very open mind. And so one thing I think you can do when you're traveling to other countries, other cultures, no matter where it is, no matter what continent, is to really have be an astute observer of so much. There's nowhere better than going on safari in Africa. And when I would observe, all the different animals, the one thing you can see is animals inherently are lazy. They lie down, especially the lion or the tiger. They're always lying around doing nothing. And they're only generally inspired or incentivized or motivated to take action when they need to under two circumstances. At least in my experience, maybe people would have it differently. Hunting for food, searching for food, feeding their pride, or the natural genesis of life of having to procreate. Obviously, nature made it where it has to be exciting, or the animals, or we would never want to do it. Sometimes going on safari and having an open mind and being around these guides that had generations of knowledge passed around not only inspires for ideas and being observant, but also teaches you how to be observant and teaches you how you can learn so much from the physical world around you and not draw your attention away from it and the importance of it. And I just think that it's so great that they could pass that on from something that we live in a time where we can travel around the world and do it efficiently and be able to experience that. Whereas if you look just even 200 years ago, people can go nowhere. Most people, even before that, lived in a tiny radius around where they lived. They didn't have the means to get out. We do. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll take those observations and be inspired by them and try to change them into different means. And for me, what always makes me reflect on that is always after coming back and being so inspired, sit by a piano, do what we were talking about earlier. Sit in my bed playing classical guitar, walking around the block thinking, reading, just putting everything in perspective that you see and really reflecting on your experiences, when you come back from a trip like that, I think is very important.
Now, you mentioned that motivation in nature is tied to survival, food, reproduction, survival itself. How does that compare to what motivates us today?
Well, I think the first thing you have to think of is that that's going to tie into modern man, modern humans. I think with modern humans, I think the first thing you have to do is always try to understand people that we're all trying to just get by. We're all trying to survive on our own level like animals are in the wilderness. And I think you have to measure people really by their actions, what their agendas are, what their motivations are, what their incentives are, and not really what people say. I think it's just very important to always really try to understand that because we always want to try to find this level of truth around ourselves. So I think those things are needed to spur us all, no matter what. We're all living creatures, and that's our DNA of life, is to try to be spurred into motion and not just be in a state of rest all the time. I think there's a balance that you need, and I think that's one thing that nature always will focus you back to balance. So to me, that's the one thing I always try to achieve, is just basic balance in life.
Now that leads me into my next topic, which is your song Couch Potato and simplicity in songwriting. You wrote this song that explores laziness in the digital age. Can you share what inspired that idea?
Well, all right. Well, the background on that, so the song called Couch Potato was actually an idea from a song with a different title that with my son, we were changing it around. What Fred and I were talking about, sometimes Fred will come in, talk about people, how they're out of tune, out of rhythm, and he's went over the same thing so many times, and he could tell who's been practicing and who's not been. And then I will share my experience with my kids, and I'm sure everybody else with their kids, just looking on and being like, my God, how could these kids, they have so much that's at their fingertips. They take everything for granted, and they just don't have the same approach and work ethic that we have. And so back then, my son will come in sometimes. He loved music, loves throwing around, being around the scene. And we were talking about song titles. We took an older song and changed it up, because sometimes you just have a working title and all of a sudden Couch Potato fit. And it was really also me coming back from Africa, learning kind of the discipline of observation of everything around you in the physical world, watching my kids, their friends, and just people in general, just glued to their cell phones, glued to the TV, glued to their computers. And that was where the inspiration is. And my hope was, we didn't want him to be fed into his laziness. From his side, he thought it was silly. He was making fun of himself. Yeah, my parents get on me. I am a couch potato sometimes, but who isn't? My other thought was, it's kind of more about technology in general. Speaking about travel, one time we did a trip into the Middle East, and a guide said to us, if you guys lived here during the time of Christ, you wouldn't last. Modern humans wouldn't last more than a day or two in this environment. And he never really expanded on that, and he makes us think about that. And I was just thinking, wow, what he's saying is that technology has made everything so convenient, makes us so lazy, and each generation seems to get lazier and lazier. So one day, as I'm grilling into my son, he's going to do the same thing with his kids, because technology is going to make them that much more lazier. Incremental laziness in that sense. Back then, if you want to get a bucket of water, you got to get a bucket and walk down the steepest hill to the little river that had clean enough water, and then hike all the way back up and do that in 110-degree temperature. And then do that 7 times a day just for you and the people around you to survive. Not many people would be able to handle that today. I think they'd be too busy on their smartphones. And so that's where it was kind of like a joke and kind of a statement, I thought, which is one way we love to write. And I will also say this, that when we were writing the song, it was great because we would start out with this kind of rhythm to the song. Fred would come in and dictate the tempo and kind of the pace, and we kind of based the rest of the song off of that. And I think that was the general inspiration for the song.
Hey, you approach the lyrics using the Hemingway method, saying more with fewer words. What was your goal with that simplicity?
Well, I think, if you read Hemingway, or people I hate to say I'm an avid reader, sounds so snobby. I'm certainly not that type of person, but I just love reading. But if you look at the older, first versions of Hemingway books, I mean, most people think of Old Man and the Sea, but I think of Sun Also Rises or For Whom the Bell Tolls. And if you look at the way his style of writing, I mean, you could, it seems so easy on the surface. It's so descriptive by using such simple statements and simple sentences. And I think sometimes the song itself for Couch Potato has to have less words because it's describing our innate laziness. Being too wordy wouldn't work. You need to set the stage. You need to set the fact that modern humans can order everything online. They can work at home. They don't need to leave their home if they never have to. And I think that with that Hemingway kind of style of writing works well with this type of song because it doesn't have a lot of words, and it's the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to have a music video to something like that. What you want to do is you want to have the listener have their own idea of what their version of this person is. And this might not even be a person. You can almost make it an alien. You can almost make it a potato, Mr. Potato Head, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, right? But I think the one constant is the laziness is still the thing that people can relate to. And I think it serves as a reminder that, you don't want to, miss out on potential achievements in your life. There's so many little things. Sometimes we're conditioned to think that you have to be this. If you're anything less than this, your life is a failure. And I think the song is also a reminder to my kids, don't be lazy on one side, but at the same time, at the end, we're passing along and you have people around you, that have so much knowledge that you can take and you can pass along to your next generation that you can make a difference in those people's lives. That's basically it. So in one side, it's very simple. If you read through it, people might say, couch potato. It's kind of funny. It's silly. But they'll never think that actually really there's a lot of craftsmanship that went behind that. There's middle sections of the song rhythmically that we spent so much time, especially as a band. And if we didn't have Fred, there is no way we'd be able to achieve the right kind of way that it needs, especially in those middle sections when you're like potato, potato, potato. There's no way. And I think that, that was the point, was starting simple and then using that kind of simple, being led by the words. The song is kind of like a constant chorus line in a sense, that led to everything else expanding from it.
Now, Fred, as a drummer and as a music director, do you take that approach as well, to say more with less?
Yeah. I mean, that's a famous saying in music, or less is more. As a drummer, I played on a track that was Grammy-nominated, one of the songs that I've done. And the artist afterwards said to me, I left so much space for her to sing. And it just blew me away because when we first started the session, the first thing she said, Fred, I don't have to tell you, but less is more. I try to get my younger students to understand, to love that space and let music breathe. Music has to breathe. Lyrics have to breathe. And if there's so much going on consistently, that music doesn't have that space, doesn't have that breath. I mean, Anthony and I, we always going at it about like, no, don't add that. Leave it. Let that space, breathe, let it breathe. Let it do this. Let it do that. So definitely, some of your greatest hits, you could hear how simple they are, and the message is huge. The message is huge. Like Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, "Wake Up Everybody," a huge song. Slide, it's a family affair. It's like simple songs, but the meaning is so deep, and there's not a lot going on. It's like, wow, you listen to that, and you, like you say, you go, man, this guy knew how to write music. Like Stevie, he wrote a song called These Three Words. Not many people could listen to that song and not get on the phone and call somebody and say, I love you. It's impossible. But it's simplicity. And if you think, everybody talks about Stevie's complexion of chords, but the way he does it is simple. It really is. His writing is complex, but at the same time, it's so simple. So much space.
I want to add one thing that I think is also really important. When you go back and you think about like a song like when we were doing Couch Potato. Well, the song, I think it's really important, I think when you're playing music, to have an open mind. But we were talking about this earlier, that like I'm so lucky, fortunately, because, I wasn't really, that's not my main trade as far as being a musician. But when I met Fred, I mean, you really up my skill levels in so many different ways. It's so important, and it reminds me the same way I was trying to remind my kids not to get lazy through a song like Couch Potato. But Fred taught me even through a song like that, where we started writing it earlier, and it wasn't there. It wasn't as good. But then being around Fred, who's so knowledgeable, passionate, and it's kind of like osmosis. It just kind of passes along to the people you're around, and you feel the spirituality. The song took a new form. And I think it's so important that all of us had an open mind. But like, if you look at from when I met you, I mean, my songwriting and skills went so far, like beyond what I thought I would be, as far as being able to put together chords, melodic lines, and be able to like match them with lyrics. It's pretty amazing. And I think that it's great that, when you're trying to write and you have somebody that knows how to have that nuance and recognize potential. And I think that's part of, being such a great educator. And I could say this, that without that, the song would never reach its potential, which I think is like relatable whenever we go out and play it for people. And also the other side of it is, one of the things that's like my performance skills has gotten so good. I mean, I remember the times we're in the studio and I'm playing, and it's not simple stuff all the time. And a lot of times I'm playing along with Fred, and Lenny goes and looks and he's like, maybe wants to quantize things, and there's almost no movement. And I'm like, I could never, ever have come close to that. If you look at pre-Fred recording for me, post you, it's a big difference. And so I think that it's so important to surround ourselves with quality people, and people that can really inspire you and really bring out the best of who you are. And from that, I'm hoping to just pass that along to my own kids. And that's actually a big part of that song. And that's why specifically I wanted to discuss that song tonight.
Well, let's shift roles into society and storytelling. Why do you think we need antagonists? Not just in stories, but in culture too.
Well, this is a tricky one. A lot of it's because I love reading Alan Watts. And I always think it's funny. Alan Watts, for people that don't watch or listen to him, they should. It's so balancing. He's one of the first Westerners to spend lots of time in India, Japan, China, all throughout Pan-Asia, and kind of understand Eastern thinking and bridge it and teach it, where he became a professor at Berkeley in California. I went to Berkeley College of Music, so it's a little bit different, but Berkeley, California, and reading his books and also listening to lectures, he always talks about the game of life. And that's kind of like one of the themes that you'll listen to in his lectures. And a lot of it's that we're all playing a role. Education is almost like teaching people to assign a role that they can add to society. He talks about that a lot. And about how like the world is a play. We play music. You don't force to play music. You're not condemned, to do music, or whatever way you could say, without using the word play. You play basketball. We do things that are fun, that are interesting. That's why we have the word play in general. But it's not interesting if, there's no counter to everything. Everything is like you get what you want all the time. There's a great, if people, I know we used to I don't know if you ever watched the original Twilight Zone episodes, but there's one where there's this guy that's a bad guy, dies, and thinks he met an angel that gives him everything he wants. He gets everything, and eventually he just gets bored from winning all the time, from getting whatever woman he wants, from getting everything he wants, where he's like, I don't want to win all the time, and then realize that the actual angel was the devil. Life would never be interesting without having the antagonist. And I think that that's why it's so, people create it all the time. I mean, think about all these people. Gossip is a huge portion of what moves humanity ahead. What do you listen to a lot of people when they're gossiping? They're complaining about people all the time. That guy sucks. This guy sucks. Oh, that guy took advantage of me. So antagonism takes place on numerous levels. It's not like one just supreme evil person that you'll see in Lord of the Rings or in this, the Darth Vader and the evil emperor. It comes on numerous levels. And I think it's very interesting to explore that without it, life would be boring. We wouldn't have plays. Sometimes it's, that's why they teach you when you're doing script writing or you're writing songs, antagonists can come in the form of a person. It can come in the form of a scenario that comes up. It could be nature. It could be whatever it is that could be that antagonizing force. But I love being able to explore that. And I think that it's very important to understand that, in our world, that's why when we discuss it, what's real and what's not, being taught of, really understanding what's around you kind of gives you a better balance of character and knowing how to judge people when you first see them. And I think it's very important to identify the good qualities in people and the bad qualities because we all share that. For people that ever read like Carl Jung, he always talks about the collective unconsciousness. How is it that we relate ideas to each other? It's because we all have it in us. We're all not good. Alan Watts would always say, humans usually are considered, in the Indian tradition, that we're 2/3 good and 1/3 bad. And why is it that everybody attracts themselves to the bad boy? It captures everybody, right? Or like those women, like, God, why is he going out with that guy? But that's because we have an attraction to that because it's in us. And I just think it's a very, very interesting sort of subject that, when we're in the times of thinking, that I love to kind of expand on that. So that's why we would create songs that kind of go into the antagonistic kind of forces that are in the world.
Do you think people today struggle with identity because they don't know what role they're meant to play?
I think that's a constant struggle for people. I think especially for younger people. I think especially with the technology of today. I think of all the influences that are today. I think it's so easily to be misled and for ideas to be planted in people's heads from like strangers that could be living thousands of miles away. Look, you look at the 4 pillars of what everybody wants to be. And this is kind of like from historical, I guess I'll put it in order. Actor, musician, model, and now influencer. And if you're anything short of that, you're basically nothing. Now for me, I like to play music because I just like music. I couldn't care anything else other than being in that moment by myself and then translating that when I'm with Fred or other musicians that know and understand at that level. And I think from that, I want to provide guidance to my own kids. I love reading like Khalil Gibran. He always had a great passage that he would write about in the Prophet where he was talking about how parents have to be great guides to their kids. We have to kind of listen to them and reflect as well. And we have to be there for them on that side. And I think part of that is understanding your identity. Yeah, through time, it's a challenge. I think it can get exploited a lot. But I think at the end of the day, I think we always have to try to put ourselves in the best light. I think it's good to surround yourself with positive influences. And I think the one thing we try to do is be mutually encouraging and not try to change people for whatever they might be or might not be. And I think that's a very important quality that we have.
Just to give Fred a chance to answer this one. Fred, do you think people today struggle with identity because they don't know what role they're meant to play?
Yeah, I run into that so much with several people. I teach a class called How to Practice, where we work on scheduling, but then we get into the mental side of practicing and what it takes to try to become great within yourself. And there's a question that I pose often to the class is, who are you? And it shocks them because they can't really identify who they are. They don't know what they possess. It's so important to know that you know that you're important. It's just like so many people don't get that they have their own DNA and they're individual. I just asked someone today, my grandson, do you think that could ever be another Kobe Bryant? He said no. I said, so why? That was very difficult for him to answer. So in order for people to reach their greatest potential, I challenge everyone to not be afraid of being who they are and being different, because the difference that you see from yourself to someone else is what's going to make you special. It's going to make you become a standout, because the more you mimic, you just run. I always tell students all the time, you're wearing the same shirt as everyone else. But the person that comes in that room where there's 1,000 people, there's an audition, and everyone is wearing white, a person comes in a red or yellow or blue, black T-shirt, that person is going to get noticed first. So they weren't afraid of being different. And I could almost guarantee you they have a good mindset and ideal of who they are, because otherwise they wouldn't went in there like that.
Well, I think it's important you're talking about also the peer pressure. It takes a lot of courage to be different. Yeah. It takes a lot of guts to stand by something and say, I like this. I am this. And, tough if nobody else likes you. You might get outcast. You might be, shipped off somewhere. But I think that at the end of the day, I think that if you take that time to understand yourself, understand your principles, and then learn through yourself and have good guidance and good mentors, good influences, I think eventually there's hope that people can find that, right? And I think that that's what's so important. And it's tragic when you see people that you can see it right away. You can see it from their body motion. You can see it from their eyes, from the way some girls will grab onto their hair more than they need to, the way that you see people glued to their phone. I was always saying this before. The easiest way to spot someone, a lot of times it's insecure, is when somebody's in an elevator, and it's rare that I'm in the elevator in my office where I don't see somebody that they're by themselves so they're not just glued to their phone. And I look at what they're looking at. It's one thing to look at your phone and to be caught up with your work for your survival, but it's another thing you're just sitting there scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, social media, whatever it is, and it's just mindless stuff. And a lot of times it's because these people are so insecure, they can't just sit there and just look around of what's around. They're afraid to do it. And I think a lot of people are just afraid sometimes to step out of that realm that makes them feel uncomfortable. That's what I love about traveling. There's nothing more. People think I'm crazy. I moved to Taiwan with nothing when I was 20 years old, and people thought, what are you doing? I didn't speak a word of Chinese then. But the challenge of being different and doing something that was just so out there, I loved it. I lived in an area where nobody spoke a word of English, and that's how I was able to speak Mandarin and become really fluent after a few months. It's because you press yourself. You have to be out of your comfort zone. People are like, oh my God, what if you eat something bad? You might, get food poisoning. What are you going to do? Where are you going to find a place to live? I'm like, you know what? Got to figure it out. It's a challenge that we want to do, especially when you're younger. You can do it. Now, my age now, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to live in hostels and some of these places that are, infested with cockroaches and stuff like that. But, when I was younger and I'm finding myself out and challenging and pushing myself, I think people need to do that. I think it reminds people, who they really are when you're pushed into adverse situations. We have it so easy here. And I think that that's one thing that can lead to identity struggle. And I think that that's the one thing is people have not been put into situations a lot of times that they really need to step up and perform and find who they really are.
Well, as we enter our final segment, you guys have both touched on a lot: originality, laziness, curiosity, and identity. When you step back, what do you think ties all of it together?
I just think it's about having a motivation to want to have something that you could say, this is me. Because everything that you mentioned, I've dealt with laziness before, watching. I'm a sports addict. So, I get locked into NBA or football or whatever, and it's like, wait a minute, I should be back there practicing. The biggest thing is, what's my motivation? If I have wrote something that's great, like something that motivates me to consistently want to be good, I don't care about any of that. I'll videotape it and go back and watch it. You know, that's why I don't like knowing scores.
Yeah,
Because
my son destroyed that the other day.
Yeah.
Devastation I saw on your face after.
Yeah, it's like I'd rather watch it later because I'm in the middle of something creative. So motivation sums it all up for me. What about you?
For me, it's the fact that we can think, that we have the ability to think. You know, it's like if you kind of compare us to the animals, we're both lazy. The difference with us and animals is being humans. Animals are just lazy, and that's their instinct. For us, we can actually take a step back and be like, wow, I'm lazy. I'm being lazy right now. I don't like this. Or like, wow, it's so nice to be lazy. You know, we have the ability to really think through those things. Sometimes I actually think we take things for granted so easily. Yet, I think it's so important to just be able to spend time in thought in so many ways and to be in your own head, to try to get you out of your own space. Think the way different people would think. Try to come from their point of views. I think at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things that we can do as humans is, first of all, not take things for granted. And I think be appreciative that we have the ability to think. We have the ability to be compassionate. And I think that you find your own means that reflects that can remind you that. And I think for us, it's doing it through music. For other people, it could be through acting. It could be through whatever their work is. You know, you do things. You know, the idea in being in our world is you want to be able to contribute, but not become a burden for the people around you. And I think if, you know, we can kind of inspire people to be like that, you know, I think that we would have a better world. And I think that everybody wants to, in their own way, kind of add something positive and contribute something positive. So for me, my only hope is that I would pass on to my kids is just to be able to think things through and not just react without giving the right step back thought before proceeding forward and really understanding the consequences of every single thing that they do. And I think having that ability to think just creates such appreciation for things. And I think when you appreciate things, you're going to understand the beauty of things. And I think when you understand the beauty of things, it ties it all together with every medium that we just discussed about in that question. And I think in the end of the day, that's what Strippedown is about. Taking that step back, getting everything down to the absolute root, and it comes down to just an idea and a thought and going from there.
If you could leave people with one question to reflect on after this, what would it be?
My question again is, who are you?
I think the one question for me is, we did another song that we can touch on later, which is Trust Your Heart. And I think the idea in the song was just treating people with respect and treating people the way you want to be treated. And anything short of that, I think, is what I always would question. Why people would ever not want that for other people. And if they don't, you know, what is it that created the conditions that made people become and think that way? With that, I just first of all want to thank Spencer for taking the time to come in here and being such a great music enthusiast. It's so nice that we have a fan. But no, joking. Thanks for Fred, Lenny, you know, and it's just so great to be around such wonderful people. I want to remind everybody that we're Strippedown, that we're going to do podcasts as much as we can, have these great discussions. We were kind of off the grid for a while. I had a bad throat for God knows a month from traveling. Reminds you, wear a mask when you're walking through planes, you know, airports, boats, docks, train stations, hotel lobbies. Just be careful of people.
Classrooms as well.
Oh, yeah. Classrooms and around kids. Yes. So We're Stripped Down. We appreciate your time. And follow us on all streaming platforms. Our website, www.strippedownband.com. You can follow us on Instagram as well at strippedownband. You can follow us on TikTok. And we are always going to come up with as much interesting, thought-provocative titles, ideas, and just hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you.